Mike, I was having trouble finding the memo. I don't know if you've updated the memo on.
No, I
that we're going
haven't
over today.
have not updated the memo.
Okay. If you can, will you put a link in the chat? January 10th meeting of the Montpelier Planning Commission. First thing we have to do is approve the agenda. So if someone has a motion to do that.
So moved.
Good motion from John. Do we have a second?
A second.
Second from Marcella. Those in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, agenda approved. Next is the comments from the chair. It's been a while, hasn't it? It's felt like ages. So first and foremost, Mike, welcome back. We're glad that you survived your ordeal.
Thank you.
Glad you're getting around. I had the same thing happen a year ago, so I kind of feel you there. Are you doing okay? Getting back to work?
Yeah. It's been 3 weeks now, so just have some limitations of stuff I can't do at home, but pretty much everything at work is fair game.
Nice. Nice.
Oh,
Good.
how did that work out? Just kidding.
Get out of doing a couple of chores at the barn.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
Imagine.
no water buckets.
Oh, man. Okay, well, it's been a while since we met. We had 2 hearings on what we're going to talk about tonight, which is proposed changes to the zoning bylaws. We've heard lots and lots of info, lots of comments, so lots to sort through. Before we get started, can we get a link to the memo that Mike had prepared that gives the most detail on these changes so that we can all follow along that as we proceed?
Yeah, I'm working on that.
And we'll just go from there. Some of these are gonna have quite a bit of discussion, I imagine. We could deliberate tonight, or we could vote tonight, rather, is what I mean to say. We'll just have to see how it goes. I know there's a lot, so I don't have any set expectation about whether we end up voting tonight. We're supposed to approve the minutes at the end if we have time. We'll have to see how it goes. If anyone else has the document pulled up, you can just throw it in the chat there.
Recording in progress.
Yeah, you don't have to wait for me. I'm just working on it.
Okay. I mean, I have all of the other documents pulled up because there's the PUD language, which I don't know if that's been updated. We'll get to that when we get to it. It's item, I think, 6 and 7 on the list. There's also the November 5 memo, which is the official, I think, statutory memo that's a summary of the changes. Are we going to have to redo that, Mike, once we vote on this?
No, that's only a requirement for the Planning Commission public hearing.
Okay.
I will update the memo as soon
Okay.
as soon as we make a decision.
The November 5 memo, I'm going to actually go ahead and throw that in the chat. Hopefully that link works for you guys. That's my name in it. The reason why I'm linking that for people to have access to is Mike, when he prepared that, flagged the parts of the city plan that were relevant to each thing. So I actually found that really useful because the sections relating to like section 4.5 goal C2B is relevant to a lot of what we're talking about. The Planning Commission is supposed to undertake a comprehensive review of all city regulations and eliminate unnecessary regulatory obstacles. Goal C1D development should reinforce existing neighborhoods and increase diversity in use. Revise zoning ordinance to make it less cumbersome for homeowners to add rental units. Improve efficient use of buildings and land where growth is concentrated. So it's just sort of a good cliff notes of the current city plan and how this stuff intersects with that. There's plenty of material there to add housing, to improve the regulations. So just in general, I feel like we're on firm ground to make the changes we want to make with this. And it looks like Mike.
Yeah.
The link.
Yeah, I wasn't able to cut and paste the direct link, so that's the link in the chat, which goes to the city website, which has all the information. The first thing on that list, if you go to the city website, is the fall 2021 zoning request. That's the memo that we're talking about.
Okay, with that, let's jump into it then. I have it pulled up. Number one is map change to Harrison Avenue, Whittier Avenue area to shift the properties from Res 6 to Res 3. How do people feel about that?
I feel positive about it, and it didn't seem like from the public there was much comment on this one.
I mean, I guess I would note that from my notes and keeping track of things that I didn't, although I had a lot of comments and questions offline before the hearings, and most of them were questions, they kind of asking some questions of concern, but when we actually got to the hearing, we didn't get any negatives on this proposal. Everyone spoke in support of making the change.
The only note I have is someone mentioned why not more? Why not opening it up more? And what do you think about that, Mike? Is there any other room for expansion and lightening things up here?
I don't think so, not directly. I think if there was a request, it would be a separate request, because those other requests were like, why not up Loomis or Liberty? And those really aren't contiguous to, the Harrison change is Harrison, Whittier, and 3 properties on Loomis Street. It's really a discrete block of connected adjoining properties. I think if there was going to be a separate request, it would be just that, a separate request to change Loomis, or a separate request to change, Liberty, I think was the request. So I think that would be a separate proposal. And I think you accurately answered that suggestion when you said that we in 2018 had a number of proposals that kind of got ratcheted back based on public comment. And I think you were very accurate in saying that this, making changes to Liberty Street is a distinctly different request that's going to have different comments, and probably is going to have significant opposition. So I would have steered clear of certainly combining those two. I think it's one, if we wanted to, we would do, I haven't done an analysis of Liberty Street to go through and give you the same analysis that we had for Harrison of it's 19 parcels, 4 of them are non-conforming. Here's what we know about what's going on this street. Here's how it relates to the other things. We don't have that analysis, and I think we would need that analysis to do an accurate assessment of Liberty Street.
Okay. So for the neighborhoods that we're looking at changing here, are there going to be any parcels in the neighborhood that are non-conforming now?
I believe they'll all be conforming after this.
Okay.
There may be some non-conforming structures, but the underlying parcel size will be all okay.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything to say?
Can I ask a quick question? I'm just now realizing on the, there's a parcel on Whittier Street that also faces Main Street, sorry. But I'm looking at the map. It looks like the house is kind of oriented toward Whittier Street rather than Main Street. But is that one not included because it's E911 is to Main? Do you see which one I'm talking about? It's the parcel with the O over it first.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't remember exactly why that one was left out, except that it was a significantly larger parcel. And so making a change, the density change on that property was going to have, a significantly greater impact on what was possible. And I think that was why I kind of hesitated to put that one in as well. But certainly is an option.
I mean, it strikes me as a little strange to leave it out, given that the house is oriented toward Whittier Street. I understand that it is a bigger parcel. I also feel like it might be too late because we would have needed to bring in the folks on the other side, or they would have been need to have been notified, since it's kind of a strange, it abuts, you know, two neighborhoods sort of. So, anyways, that's fine. I don't feel that strongly.
Do you think there would be a notice issue if we changed it, Mike?
I don't think there's a notice issue. I mean, I can include a specific notice to them when this, if you vote to do this, I could always send them a specific notice that goes through and says, we're making this change, and Planning Commission voted to add you in when it goes to the city council hearing, and they can, you know, give comment of whether or not they want to be in or not in at that time for that particular one.
I'd be in favor of it if you want to change it, Marcella. What do other people think about? Seems tidy, and also it just seems appropriate for the area too to allow more around there. To me,
It's certainly, I mean, I don't want to I'm not a developer, so, you know, it's certainly a strange parcel access issue. I mean, the house takes up the whole Whittier frontage, right? So you'd have some weird potential access issues off of Main or I don't know what, but, you know, that could be strange if people were to put more houses on it, and the houses directly behind are definitely a bit different than that Whittier frontage and Harrison Ave frontage.
what do we want? Do you want to?
I guess I don't feel that strongly. No, if no one else is saying they feel strongly to add it, then I don't need to be there. We don't have to do it.
Anyone else inclined to add it? Okay.
I mean, okay. I don't want to make things more complicated.
Yeah.
Okay. We can leave that for now. If you guys think about it further in the meeting and go back, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'd be open to the change you're talking about if we want to propose that change. Okay, let's move on to number 2 then, if we don't have anything else there, which is the Heaton Woods, Washington County Mental Health, making that change. We heard a lot of feedback. I think there was a lot of concerns about what might happen. I think there was just a lot of opportunity for learning on that one. I think we got a lot of clarity about what's actually going to happen or what's planned, well, I shouldn't say actually for any of this, what could happen on that parcel. How do people feel about that after the hearings?
I think I agree that I felt like the tenor of the comments were generally around, like, maybe there was an opportunity for better communication around the project itself, or it was much less oriented toward the actual change of zoning than more about the specific project. So I'm not super concerned about moving forward with that zoning change.
You know, and I would just say, like, my blanket comment is that most of the feedback was sort of along those lines altogether, right? That people had comments that they wanted to be in a DRB meeting and argue about the value of the project or whether it met some kind of guidance, as opposed to whether the zoning actually made sense for the area. So
Yeah, and I
I'll
think,
just say generally I'm in favor of everything.
yeah, I think it's generally disappointing, just the Washington County Mental Health, the information they gave me kind of made, my memo look deceptive, even though it's basically exactly what they had talked about. And even I think when Keith talked, it wasn't very clear that think, I think in the end, what the proposal is that they're planning to do 19 units in the existing building. But they can't do these additional 4 units in the parking lot, 4 single-family, single homes. And the ones inside the building will be for clients, Washington County Mental Health clients, and the ones outside in the parking lot may or may not be clients. They may just be family housing. And I think that is the accurate description, and I think it would have been it would have clarified a lot of the conversation. We got caught up in, as you said, the project discussion. But really, we need to have, if they want to do this larger project, they would not be able to do the full 19 units in the building because they don't have enough capacity. So they'd have less units in the building, and they wouldn't be able to have the units outside. So with the 3,000, they could do these. And I kind of wish we had a clearer set of public input on the specifics of that. Which again, we're not really approving the project. We're really just going through and saying, what should the zoning be for these 2 parcels? Is it appropriate to have them zoned residential 6,000 when they're clearly not of residential 6,000 character? Should they be rezoned something different?
Yeah, and I think the surrounding neighborhoods have a character that has a lot more dense of development. I think like looking at College Street and Liberty and just everything around it seems to match a higher number of units type category for this area. So is everybody fine with it with it as is, as Mike wrote it up? No tinkering here.
I think so. I think we could do a better job of making some of this information more accessible and easier to understand what's happening and what's being proposed. I tried just right now going to the City of Montpelier's website and saying like, okay, what if I knew nothing? Would I be able to figure out like what's happening? And it's not very easy. And then when I do find it, it's because I sort of know what I'm looking for. So I think that's an area or something we can do moving forward to help make it clearer and easier to explain what's happening. I realize, most people received a letter that explained a lot of this, but a lot of that was, or all of those people were the property owners. And I think there was also a comment around renters not receiving notice of this. And, that's Vermont state law, and maybe a shortcoming of Vermont state law. There's no way for us to easily communicate with renters. There's no, we have no idea who they are, and I'm not proposing that we can solve that, but some things that we can do is make things easier to find on our website and maybe in a more digestible format. So
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, John, and I think that it's not too late for this one. I think that if we vote tonight or next time, whatever we approve, maybe we could do a clearer, more thorough write-up from this and then put it right on the main planning page, something like that. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, or even the city website and
just temporarily.
Yeah.
You think we could do that, Mike?
Yeah, I can talked to the IT folks about seeing if we could get it up into the upper banner more with our revised memo and with our when it moves forward, just to go through and make sure it's clear up in the next section. We have tried to go and put it in the weekly memos. We've tried to get it out in a couple other venues, but yeah, there's certainly a lot of shortcomings in trying to be able to work. There's money in the budget to update the website in the next fiscal year, so I think that'll help. This has been a challenging website to work with, and our IT person who used to run this is no longer working for the city, so we went with a third-party IT group. So we've kind of cut ourselves off the knees for making larger changes to this platform. So I think that's the city's big picture, is to kind of move in that direction, to make a better website and move it to a better platform. But certainly before we get to the city council hearing, we can go through and do a bit more of a media blast and get it on our Facebook and Front Porch Forum, and make sure we hit as many of these as we can to help get the word out.
Yeah, I think it'll help that, once we vote, we can have an updated memo that's more informative, and then put it at a higher profile. I think that's a good point, John. Sounds like we're good on number 2 here. I don't have anything for changes myself. So before we move on, is everyone good on number 2 then? Okay. So the third one is the biggest as far as public reaction. Map change on Northfield Street to change some parcels on the east side of the street from MUR and rural to Res 9. I have a few takeaways just generally about this, and I think it's, for one, I actually feel like this whole thing exposed that when we went through and redid the zoning a while back, that I think there were some holes we were aware of. Like I'm aware that the zoning's not in what I think ideal shape on that side of the river and in that area, because I see that as an area that has access to public transportation, some like bus routes, and it has access to downtown. It's kind of on the edge of what's walkable to downtown, could be considered part of the downtown if things were done right. So it seems like it's underdeveloped for what the city's needs are. And at the same time, there's a lack of parks over there. And that's come up in our park discussions when we were going through the city plan redo. I think we are aware that that's, like I think John at one point mentioned where he lives, like near the middle school, there's an overabundance of park access, and then in other places like the neighborhoods over there's not a lot of park access. So I feel like those sort of weaknesses that we were kind of already aware of came up in this. So there's a need for open space and parks over there, and there's also a need, I think, for the zoning to reflect that it's an area where development could be useful. It's my general reactions. What do you guys think about number 3?
I've got a question for the people who are involved in the previous zoning update. Why was this one, and I have the same question, not to like raise everybody's alarm bells, but I have the same question for Sabin's Pasture. Why were these zoned rural to begin with, when we never intended them to be rural forever?
My perspective is that zoning remake was largely based off of trying to make the zoning look like the real world right now. That's the way I see it, and I'm glad you really asked that, because I've been kind of wanting to get this off my chest, so to speak. I feel like when we did that, we were like trying to catch things up, because the zoning was it got behind. It became like really closed off and like a tool to like keep things as they are. And so that redo was to catch things up with reality somewhat. So Mike did his thing where it was like to catch things up to 90% conformance, right? But it wasn't super forward thinking, I don't think. I don't think, like, it was just to catch it up. And so we caught these areas up, but there's these areas where it makes a lot of sense for a lot more housing to go in some places. But since it hasn't happened yet, that zoning redo didn't catch it up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
John, what do you have to say? You were around.
Yeah, so for Savings Basher, that's not what the Planning Commission recommended. It's what the City Council changed it to. I think there was some public pressure to downzone that into a number of different districts. The new neighborhood PUD was sort of an attempt to address the concerns being articulated, which are similar to those I think we're currently hearing, was around access to trails and open space. So we were trying to find a way. They weren't actually around density or anything that had to do with housing. They were just the idea was, there's that people didn't want to lose access, or they saw an opportunity to gain access to potentially a network of trails and open space. So we were trying to find a way, like, how do we facilitate the creation of those networks and open spaces while not putting these arbitrary limits on development. So, but for Savings Fasher, it's not what the Planning Commission recommended. It's what was changed. And as for the Northfield Street property, it never, as far as I can remember, came up in discussion when we're basing the zoning largely on what's existing. You could see how that can be a flawed logic unless we're being purposeful about identifying an area that we want and increase in future development. I think the thinking around that property was it's has some challenges with regard to topography and accessibility. No one was proposing to develop it, and it had not been part of any conversation compared to a few other high-profile properties. So it just was originally proposed like that. No one really asked for different, and there wasn't any discussion around it.
Yeah, and I think there's probably more of those around because we only have so much time, So it's like things like this, like, actually expose like things that maybe should have been obvious when you're going through it. But yeah, I think there's other Northfield streets around, maybe other places where there could be some good development, but we got to catch the zoning up and allow it.
But when did the other parcel on Crestview change zoning? Was that part of the previous zoning rewrite, or was that? I can't.
Yeah, it was under the previous zoning. It was there. We made some tinkering with it at some point, but it was already in there because it had already gone through, and I believe in Act 250 it was proposed to be subdivided. Already had plans for extending sewer and water in there, so we pretty much had already assumed at some point this is going to have sewer and water extended into it. So, rural is any place that doesn't have access to sewer and water. So, a couple of these parcels made it in.
Yeah, I guess that's something I didn't realize. So, as soon as a developer would approach a rural parcel and say, we are intending to bring sewer and water in, is when we might make these changes. It just seems sort of a confusing process to me, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we should, in theory, and this will probably and hopefully should come up as we talk about our land use plan, is to start looking to the future of where we want to draw. I mean, I hate to use the word urban growth boundaries, but, a lot of times we have to decide where we should stop our urban, so that way we don't have, just sprawling sewer and water. We don't have sprawling sewer and water, so it hasn't been an issue to have that conversation. But at a certain point, you have to kind of have that discussion of, okay, how far out do we run the sewer and water out Elm Street? Do we care if it went all the way to the end of the town line, or should there be areas in Montpelier that are kept at lower density? We should have those conversations and not kind of play it on a case-by-case basis. But I think until we get to that conversation, we're kind of, as Kirby said, we did a lot to get our zoning up to matching what's on the ground. And a lot of the discussion was, a lot of the opposition we got was this is going to change the character of our neighborhoods. And so by just matching what's on the ground, we could kind of really quickly put that discussion to bed. I think it's very important for us to start having those conversations with the community about how can we increase the densities of some of our neighborhoods, because we have the capacity, we have the sewer capacity, we have the water capacity, we have police and fire capacity, we have school capacity. We can either add more density to our existing neighborhoods, or we could run sewer and water out to these, next levels. And that's really the question of, if we're going to have more housing, where do we want it? What's the best for our community? These farther out are probably less walkable and bikeable. Getting more density in town, is going to be, that's going to, the public discussion I think we need to have. But that was going to be the next discussion. We had to get through the first discussion of it. Let's at least get the zoning to match what's on the ground, so we stop having 65-70% of our parcels being non-conforming and everybody having to go to hearings to do anything, and in many times not being able to do it. So that was get through the first step. Now we're in a position to start having some good conversations, I think, and I hope that we'll be able to have, and hopefully have a good look at our land use discussion about trying to look ahead to go through and say, where is it appropriate for us to start proposing zoning changes that would go through and reflect, as Kirby said, not reflecting what's on the ground, but reflecting where things could be. What should the old golf course be? What should some parts of Sabin's pasture be that are currently zoned rural? I think those are important conversations to get to when we're doing the land use plan.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. That's helpful. And I just want to second that that's a really important conversation, because the character of the neighborhood complaint does not, I do not understand it. And I have not yet heard explanation of, what it is actually the problem. And so it leads me to believe it's stuff that's not, we're not going to make policy around. So I really want to have that conversation. Kirby, just really want to have that conversation.
About what, about
about this forward-looking thing, and when people come in and they tell us that this is going to be, I have notes from the hearing, and there's just some of the concerns that I heard, I just don't understand, because I'm not following what they're telling me. And so, and when people say it's going to change the character of the neighborhood, I just I want to dig into that. And I want to know what exactly they're talking about the character of the neighborhood, and how, yeah. So if this can be part of our land use chapter, that's great.
Yeah, I agree.
And I was just going to add on John's comment about making it easy and accessible. Let's take notes about what we do for this, so that we can do the same thing or improve upon it again for the city plan process, because we're going to need a really robust outreach process for that as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. So as far as number 3 goes, I mean, I'm open to us maybe modifying the what we do here based on some concerns in the neighborhood. I mean, I I agree that there's a need for open space, for instance. So whatever zoning change we do, I think we need to be able to tell city council that we feel good about whatever happens in this area, that there will be open space.
How do we ensure that? Do we own land over there? Does the city own land over there? I mean, somebody made a good point of like, yeah, how can someone explain to me how we would do that through the zoning? Because someone made a good point at the meeting of that this property owner could revoke their right to walk on that land tomorrow and we could do nothing about it. So I don't think leaving it as rural is an option for, you know, preserving open space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess if I
Oh,
I was going to say, if I can just jump in, it's actually, you know, gets to unconstitutional to be able to try to use zoning to allow public access. You know, I think we have a number of tools, and a lot of times, planners included, they try to get too much out of the zoning, and it's, you know, sometimes there's right and wrong and better tools to do what we want to do. And I think working with our parks director on, you know, kind of connecting our parks director with, you know, with Zach and his project, and trying to build towards a project and a process that would make that happen. To be able to identify a part of that parcel that the city will buy or get an option to buy, I think is the best way of reaching that goal. Because even if we did, you know, when this came up with Sabin's pasture, you know, even if we required clustering down at the bottom and left the top open space, we can't through zoning require public access to that open space. It just means it's not built on, which is why these conservation ones work good for protecting natural resources, wetlands, steep slopes, because we're not actually giving permission for people to use it. We have a governmental interest in making sure people don't build in the wetlands for water quality, flood storage, and a number of reasons. That's why we protect it, but we can't give public access to it because that extends beyond what we can do under the U.S. Constitution. So it becomes tricky, but we can work in a public-private partnership, which I think is what Zach wants to do with this project, is to be able to build towards a win-win solution. And what he needs to make his side win is to be Res 9. And if he's got that, then we've got the ability to cluster and be able to then work on Plan B. And I think it's unfortunate because, as you said, the owner can leave it rural and just simply prohibit any development. They could log it flat. They could subdivide it into 27 parcels, you know, or whatever, 20 parcels, and put individual houses on it. You know, simply saying it's going to stay rural does not mean it's going to stay unbuilt. I think if our goal is to have a park up there, and I think Zach wants to get a park up there, our parks director wants to get a park up there, city council would want to get a park up there. I think everybody wants to get a park up there, but to try to go and figure out how to get the zoning to shoehorn that in, I think is going to lead to disappointment, because I don't think it's going to actually work that way.
So to clarify what I was saying, I wasn't talking about public access. I really just meant open space, and I meant, like, for instance, making sure that a project like the one that Habitat's talking about can go in there, and doing it in a way in which that is possible, and that more that cluster development in general, and that open space is like something that's, you know, that's available to be done up there, is kind of what I was getting at. But I love what everyone's saying about the park thing too, because I think that, you know, whether this Habitat project happens or not, we need to have some discussions about parks over there, maybe this parcel, maybe somewhere else, maybe both is a great idea. But I wasn't necessarily talking about public access there.
well, I also think,
I was just going to ask Mike if he thinks that, like, as proposed, that it achieves, like, kind of what we're all talking about, or if there could be improvements to really be able to assure the neighbors that whatever change we make is only going to be for the good for them, because it's going to mean that it's more likely that there'll be open space, possibly public access, but as you said, that's not guaranteed unless the city buys it.
Yeah, I think the message to the neighbors is, certainly if the zoning change isn't there and, Zach has to abandon the project, then the neighbors haven't gotten a park. And we have no connections with anybody to advance a project because we have a Burlington property owner, and maybe we could have the parks director working with the reach out and see if they could build a relationship to go and to develop some parkland up in there. But I think the easier path is when we have an existing developer who's interested in the site and is interested in creating a park and is, in need of the resources, and it would benefit their project to have us, be able to contribute to the project by, purchasing, if we purchase the park from him, then he's got that cash on hand to use on his project. And I think there are two options. There are win-win and kind of lose-lose, and I think having the project fail is putting it back in the court of, well, there's still no park and there's still no proposal for a park, and it becomes a little bit more challenging to figure out how we would make that work. But it's not impossible. I think Parks Director's been doing an awesome job with what he's been working on so far, and I think he would be able to get to it, but he's got a couple of projects on his plate right now that he's working on. So,
do we have any idea if oh, sorry, go ahead, Ariana.
Yeah, I was going to let her take her shot because it was my fault. She didn't get to talk.
That's okay. Well, I really support just moving forward as proposed by Mike. And I guess, I definitely would support, seeing a park plan up there, and that's exciting to hear that, the Parks Director is thinking about that. But I would also think my understanding of this parcel is it does have a lot of steep slopes. So, if the neighbors feel worried about, we rezone this, the habitat project doesn't work out, somebody else could come in. Well, yeah, somebody else could come in, but I think they're very unlikely to develop on the majority of the parcel, is if my sort of basic understanding of the parcel is correct. So, I don't know if that's a reassurance to the neighbors or what, but just to put that in there. Okay.
Go ahead, John.
I was just going to ask Mike if you had any idea if the proposal would work with the new neighborhood PUD.
I don't know the conditions off the top of my head or the specifics. The different PUDs have some different hangups with them. I think the hope is that certainly with the new PUDs, with the general PUDs, the clustering would be available. But I don't know specifically what would be the hangups from using the new neighborhood.
It requires a mix of types of units. It requires that 40% of the area be, I forget the exact term, undeveloped or set aside as open space. And there's provisions around which parts of it should be, but looking at that would not be very hard to meet, especially given the percentage of the parcel that is just encumbered by some very steep slopes. So some of it comes down to these other questions around a mix of types of housing units. Would that be problematic or not?
Well, I think the issue, one of the issues, I mean, not insurmountable issues, is that new neighborhood is not allowed in the rural district.
No, I know, but I'm just saying if we were to rezone it and the new neighborhood PUD were to remain, would that be a problem for this project?
Yeah, that would be getting into the details with Zach as to what they're proposing very specifically and whether it would meet all of these rules, because it would be, as this is written right now, there's a proposal to strike number 2, which is a requirement. He would be required to do it this way in a new neighborhood, as opposed to having it as an option and using just a general PUD to cluster. I think some people had pointed out that, there could be as many as 270 units that would be possible, and he wasn't looking at needing 270. But there's, if it stays rural, he only has 27, and that's not enough units. I always hate to throw this one out because I hate this zoning designation, but there is zoning 24,000, which would not be as low as 1. So
I don't think anyone's concern is actually the density or the zoning, right? It's
the protecting the open space.
So if this gets them the number of units they need, and they're going to be open to preserving or designating that much area as park anyway, then that might be a way of saying, like, moving forward, this ensures that there'll be a park no matter who tries to develop it, unless they go very low density. Then they wouldn't be required if they're under 40 units to the new neighborhood PUD. I was just wondering if you knew whether or not that would be an issue, because that could be a way of addressing everyone's concerns.
Yeah, and I don't off the top of my head know what would be the barriers. I honestly I've known only generally what what is being envisioned and not specifically what's being proposed. I think part of that is in their next 6-9 months of feasibility is kind of going through. They're thinking they need around 50 units in order to be financially feasible to cover the costs of extending and building roads and sewer and water and kind of making the project work. That's how they're kind of getting to this needing about 50 units. And maybe it grows to more, but they're not looking to grow spatially more, because most of that, as Ariane pointed out, is mostly unbuildable without great expense. I mean, anything with enough money, but if you're looking at building affordable housing, it's not going to be in these hinterlands. So I think we would have to do a little bit more homework on that to determine whether simply changing the zoning but keeping the required neighborhood in would satisfy that.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I guess at this point, we're just going to have to be comfortable with the possibility of a new neighborhood PD going in, or development taking place without it, since we don't have that info.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. So, John, are you talking about changing the zoning but making some requirement for new neighborhood PUD, or I don't understand.
That's existing right now. So if we were to right now in the new zoning proposal, we're proposing to get rid of the new neighborhood requirement.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So if we were to upzone this, but the new neighborhood requirement didn't go away, I'm just wondering if that creates an issue or not for anyone. I understand why we're proposing to remove it, and there could be some issues with it, but at the same time, if the project would be able to, if it doesn't impact anything of what's being proposed, then it's one way of saying, listen, like, we're giving them the units they need, but in turn, there also needs to be a certain percentage of this land that needs to be set aside as a park. But we don't know.
I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. Maybe we can vote it out a certain way, but if that information is made available later before city council, maybe it could be factored in. So I think it's a good thing to flag at the least. I have a question, and this goes to just concern over potential challenges to any changes we make. The city plan says, where an entirely new neighborhood is created, the existing characteristics of adjacent neighborhoods shall be used as a model to allow commercial uses to make use. I don't know. There's a typo here or something. To allow commercial uses are integrated with residential uses in ways that maintain neighborhood character while allowing more home and neighborhood based economic activities. Mike, do you feel like any changes that we would make if we made this proposed change, that it would meet that?
I mean, not sure when that particular phrase was written, whether it was in under the old zoning or under the new zoning, but I would think we're not cutting it out to be a separate zoning. We are matching this neighborhood to the adjacent neighborhood as in the zoning. I think just topography is going to make it difficult for us to match uses and match everything significantly. I think what they're trying to do is maybe look at ones like the Harrison Ave change, where you're going to make a zoning change and neighborhood change, and you want to make it consistent with those surrounding it. And I think that in that case that meets it. Same with Heaton Street, I think is, we reflected a little bit of the fact that it is not consistent with its existing neighborhood. So that's why we're kind of separating it out to treat it uniquely. And I think this would be a case I think we would still be fine with, because we're not creating a separate neighborhood that's plunking in between. We're keeping the rules the same. I think we'll be on solid ground.
Okay.
Of course, 7 attorneys, you'll get 7 different opinions, but I'm comfortable in my position saying that I think this is fine.
I feel good about being on the record about, this is something that was on our mind, and just stating that in our deliberations that we are comfortable with making a zoning change, and we believe that the existing characteristics of adjacent neighborhoods would be like a model for this, but with the caveat that Mike said that the topography around here is really challenging, so it's not going to be exact, and we're also aware of that, but we're comfortable that we're following the city plan the best we can.
Yeah, probably a better example would be, Sabin's Pasture. As it gets developed, its neighborhood is changed, but at the same time, we're trying to make it consistent with those other properties on Berry Street. It's kind of meant to integrate with that existing neighborhood. Yes, it's changing. Yes, it's in a new neighborhood, but it's meant to integrate with the uses and buildings and bulk and massing, and it's kind of meant to integrate in. That's different. That's has direct connection to the street. This one is going to be more challenging because it's going to have a long access road to get up to it, because it's got a bunch of unbuildable part before you get to the buildable area. So it's going to be a more challenging place to kind of use that as a guidepost.
Okay, thanks. Do we have other comments about this? I think that the point John made is definitely worth noting. I don't hear him saying that he wants to like wait to vote on whether we gain that information.
We can kind of decide that afterwards, probably. Kind of, if we can always make decisions and not necessarily vote it out tonight, and kind of put it in Zach's. He's on the line listening, so I can sit down and have a conversation with him tomorrow, and we can see where let him take some time to think about how much of a problem that could be, because I don't think on the fly we can reply. We could certainly make some decisions tonight that says this is where we're thinking of going, and then he can come back in 2 weeks and give some input to go through and say, yeah, I think I can make that work, or I really need the flexibility because of X, Y, and Z, and then you guys can make a decision with that input. But at least he'll have a couple of 2 weeks to kind of go and chew on what the proposal would be.
Okay, yeah, we can decide that at the end. Okay, so anyone want to say anything else on item 3 before we go on?
I did want to go over one thing real quick, just for the record. Again, as you were talking about legal stuff, we did get the Northfield Street zoning change petition, which technically, it doesn't work. I mean, it's not like a zoning thing. But it was a petition they put together, and they had 6 comments, and I think we've talked about some of them, but I feel if we got a petition with 30, 40 names on it, we should probably at least just touch on the 6 points. One, they were complaining this was going to be spot zoning because it was changing it for the benefit of one. Legally, I don't think that's an issue. Usually spot zoning is talking about, it's not even a thing. It's kind of a colloquial thing. We talk about spot zoning. But usually what spot zoning is looking at is treating a similar parcel differently from those parcels around it. So, they have the same character, they have the same thing, but we're gonna carve them out for preferential or deferential treatment. And I think in this case, we're not. Yes, we are changing one part. Technically, we're changing 2 parcels, but we're changing one parcel in particular, but we're matching it to the neighborhood next to it. We're not carving it out for special treatment. We're actually carving it out to treat it in the same way as its abutting properties. So I think that argument, I don't think really stands up. And, again, I'm not an attorney, but I think we're fine there. They commented on some of the ideals within the master plan, including protecting hillsides and ridge lines and accessible, well-maintained open space. This comes up enacting zoning to protect hillsides and ridge lines. And this area recommended for biodiversity conservation area designation. And I don't believe it actually is designated as one of the areas for biodiversity. And I don't disagree that the master plan does talk about those other pieces, but again, I think as we talked about earlier, the open space issue is an important one, but I think it's one that has to be addressed outside of the zoning, because we can protect open space, but we can't make it publicly accessible. And I think what we all want from the city council on down to the residents is to get some parkland over there.
I would add to that, Mike, that what we're trying to do here is we are trying to achieve that. We are trying to, in a sustainable way, figure out zoning that's going to work for open space. So we are actually proactively doing the opposite of what that's claiming, I believe.
Yeah. So the third point they wanted to make was that they felt the infrastructure wasn't available to support it, including the Montpelier schools are overcrowded. We did pull some data to go and show that the schools are not overcrowded. They have plenty of capacity left. That is not an issue. They said with the additional BOVES project that's being proposed, there wouldn't be enough school capacity. And according to the school board, that's just not the case. So with the data. And that Cherry Street is a steep and narrow road and can't handle additional traffic. And, the Habitat project isn't proposing an access through Cherry Street. And if it is, then it would be addressed in the DRB hearing. We're just looking at the zoning in general. But the proposal, my understanding is coming in on Northfield Street. So I don't think those are ones that are significant. For the proposed zoning changes reflects a continuing and significant lack of equity in Montpelier. And this is specifically going towards not receiving public amenities. We get a burden of the traffic infrastructure, higher speed limits. We're on the wrong side of the tracks. And the land that's being proposed is one of the few that could be used to produce an enhanced public amenity to address equity issues. And I don't think any of us disagree with that. It's come up in our conversations with the green print, in the discussions of parks, in the discussions of the natural resources, that this side of town needs to get a park. And as I think we discussed earlier, I think this is actually our best case to get a park, is actually to rezone it and let this project move forward so we can take advantage of the opportunity to get a park put in there potentially. Their fifth comment was that the proposed change to a more intensive use will greatly impact the viewscapes, developing ridgelines again. Adjoining areas are within the valley, and the zoning changes affect primarily the ridge top. I'm not sure these, based on the length, again, that's kind of getting into the specifics of the project. There's certainly a lot of conditions that the DRB could put on a project to ensure that certain areas are not logged or cut, to protect the fact that you can build on top of a ridge line, and if you don't cut down the trees, you're not going to see what's up there. Where it becomes an issue from a ridge line and viewscape standpoint is when somebody goes up and you build basically mansions on the top of the hill, and everybody wants good views. You cut down all the trees to make sure you get great views. And certainly that can be addressed through the public process. And then there's issues about, number 6 was about steep slopes and stormwater on neighboring properties. And I think this, again, we have some in 2018, we adopted some very strict stormwater rules. And these are only getting stricter at the state. So I think whatever Habitat or whoever is developing this is going to have to address significant stormwater rules for whatever impervious cover they put up there. There's two levels. One's at the state, and if you are exempt from the state, then we cover you under our zoning. So I think they laid out their concerns. I just wanted to make sure, because it was a signed petition, that we all kind of make sure we've heard what their comments were. I opined on a couple of them, but if you guys want to discuss those further before moving on, I wanted to at least put that out there.
I like what you said, Mike. I'm glad we have that in the record. I would add that this is not an isolated change. This is part of, we have an incremental longer term plan to do more in this area. We're working on the city plan to do more in the very long run in this area, and this is all part of that same work. So I don't think any of the planning commission is making any change here that we think is isolated or a one-time thing. This is part of a longer term thing. Anybody else have anything to add for number 3? Okay, let's go on to 4. If I can find it. Proposal to reduce the side setbacks in Res 9 from 15 to 10. Anyone have anything on this? I think it's good. I live in a neighborhood that I think's higher density than that. I live in the Meadows. Our side setbacks, I think they're probably non-conforming, but there's like hardly any side setbacks in a lot of places, and it's a fine neighborhood. Have that aesthetically. No comments. Number 5, change the setback. Change the setbacks on property lines abutting the rail line. So this is the rail line issue. We heard about that. Everyone seemed fine with the proposed change there.
We did get an amended response from Alicia about what their suggested language could include, which was 1, a setback of 5 feet will be permitted along individual property lines that abut railroad properties. 2, a setback minimum of 0 will be permitted along individual property lines that abut rail lines if an access agreement is secured between the railroad property and the property to be developed for maintenance of said property. Such agreement will need to be executed prior to the City of Montpelier zoning permit issuance. So that was some suggested draft language that they had. So I think I had put in there that it had to be 5 feet because we really couldn't allow a 0-foot setback. But they talked to the state, and she sent the context of the email. So I've got the email proof that these were actually communications with the state. So I'm confident that the state's on board with this proposal if we want to amend it.
Anybody have anything on this one? Okay, I'm gonna move along.
So are we agreeing to amend to Alicia's proposal?
That was brought up in the hearing, wasn't it? I mean, I thought we had that ahead of time, so it seemed reasonable to me to include that.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for the clarity though, Mike. Yeah, that was my assumption was, I know that this proposal at one point got kind of updated. Yeah. Okay. The next one is PUD's language. So number 6 was new planned unit development rules for general PUD and footprint PUD requests. My first question for you, Mike, is you sent us the language a while ago. It was a 7-page document with some strike-throughs and some highlights. Has it changed since then?
No, I haven't made any edits to it.
Okay. Do you want to give us the summary of
So
details?
the real quick summary is that so most communities have a general PUD. Most of them don't have specific PUDs. So just a general PUD allows somebody to 2-acre zoning, 10 acres. You got 5 parcels. You could cluster the 5 parcels. Each one gets 1 acre, and then you've got either one that owns the big parcel or a separate open space parcel that is either owned by the community or something along those lines. So that's generally how a general PUD would work. You're not looking at a density bonus. You don't have very many requirements, but it gives developers the ability to start to shift and move stuff based on topography, and it's generally just a good tool in the toolbox for developers to be able to work with. Again, these are subdivisions, so you're really talking about clustering building lots and deciding how to allocate the amount of development on them. So that's kind of how the footprint PUD is just kind of, you don't hear about it very often, but in projects it comes up a lot. And really where you'll see it a lot are condominiums, where you are going to own your townhouse, and you own including the walls and roof and everything else. You own the townhouse, but you share your parking, you share your recreation, you share stormwater and all of these other things. So you're still going to pay a condominium fee, as opposed to a true condominium where you might you own everything from the paint in. You don't own the building itself. You kind of own a piece of the property. So really where the footprint PUD comes in is where you're actually going to subdivide parcels and cut out little pieces of land. So if you're subdividing land, then you need to have this PUD in there as an option. And again, it usually comes up, it will come up, I think it would come up a lot if somebody decided to do a tiny home subdivision. You might go through and subdivide, and you might even have something where you have your own parking space. But really, you're going to own a very small piece of land, maybe 1,000 square feet to plunk down your tiny home and a little place to park a car, and everything else gets shared, your access road, your stormwater, and you're going to probably pay a maintenance fee to a condominium association, but you own your house, and you can sell your house and improve your house because you own the house and that small piece of land, as opposed to, I don't know the exact nature of the ones up on the hill, but some of the other condos, you kind of own the unit, but you can't go out and you're not responsible for the roof. The condo association is responsible for your roof, and you're not responsible for, because you don't actually own the building. You kind of own the right. You own a piece of the building, but not the land. So that's kind of where things start to differ. Legally, it's a little bit clearer when you get into the land use attorneys. They kind of understand the difference between the two, but really functionally the difference is, are you subdividing the land to create the condo, or are you not subdividing the land to create the condo? And this would make sure we've got all the flexible tools out there that we can make. But again, there's no density bonus because you're not doing anything above and beyond. There's no density bonus in there.
Okay, does anyone have any questions or anything for this one?
There wasn't a whole lot of comment about this area, but as we're looking at our goal of increasing housing, the more flexibility you can provide developers to be creative. Some of them don't need the density bonus if they need it. There's ways that they can develop to get that, but this just allows them, if they don't need the density bonus, some more flexibility.
Yeah, this is a bigger question, but I feel like we have this problem. The PUDs don't have enough of an incentive yet. So I don't know. I don't know what to do about it because I'm not educated enough in the area to know like how can we, I don't know, how can we get more interest in using PUDs?
I think a little bit of it is we're kind of bite ourselves, and this happened with the conversation the last time in 2018 when we did the zoning, is you kind of have to take one of two choices, Sabins being the perfect example. The Planning Commission proposal was we're going to require PUDs, and then we're going to set a low zoning density for the entire 100 acres. Therefore, the developer is going to want to do higher density by the road. And they're going to have to then do the PUD to cluster and leave open space. So that gives us the ability to kind of work it out that way. But as soon as you kind of match the densities to the ground and say, okay, well, down in the lower pasture, we're going to make it 14 or 27 units an acre. There's no incentive to cluster because you have all the density you need. So you kind of have to make your choice. We're either going to make densities low and then artificially low and then have PUDs in there so that way it encourages people to go to do the PUDs, or we just set the density where we think they should be in the first place, in which case nobody's going to probably need a density bonus, in which case nobody's going to want to actually do a PUD. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing that people are willing to build to our densities. So I guess that would be my thought.
I think there actually are, Montpelier has some pretty significant opportunities. I think the reality is that the economics haven't made sense for people to come in here and build at the prices people were willing to pay based on the cost of labor and materials. And that's changing, and that's why you're seeing more people starting to think about this and starting to, but it takes a long time to get these things in process. So I don't know. I think time will tell. I think you've actually done a really good job.
Thanks, Gabe. I was thinking along the lines of like if we could come up with incentives other than density linked incentives. But I haven't done a lot of research about whether such a thing exists, and so.
And I think PUDs are also tied very much, as I mentioned, they're tied to subdivisions. And we just simply in general don't get a lot of subdivisions. When we get projects that happen, even the large projects like the Boves project that isn't going yet, but has been discussed at length. That's 40 units on a single parcel. So there's no real subdivision there. They're subdividing that parcel off from the Econo Lodge to create a lot to build this project. But usually PUDs are going to come into play when we're talking about taking a Sabin's pasture and cutting it into 30, 40 lots. But actually the proposal that's for Sabin's pasture is really to only make maybe 8, 9 lots because they want to put in bigger structures. We want 12 to 14 unit buildings. So, if we get 10 parcels, we can do 120 units. So that's the scale of what they're looking at, which again, PUDs just don't necessarily invite that. Usually you're going to see a lot more PUDs in areas that are, a fast-growing Franklin County, where somebody's got a 30, 40 acre parcel that was an old farm that they want to subdivide into single-family homes. That's where they start to kind of make sense. The PUDs kind of work.
Does anyone else have anything on this number? Okay. Number 7, removal of required PUD language in new neighborhood and conservation PUDs. Give a refresher on this one.
I was going to say, I've been the one who's thrown this out multiple times, and it's survived my endless putting these things out. So yeah, I mean, again, my thing is I find that the requirement ends up being a disincentive. If we require 40 units, then somebody may be more likely to come in and just do 39 in order to avoid the requirement. When we want more housing, but either they can't make it work because of the rules, or they simply don't want to, their project idea doesn't match that, so they simply do a smaller project. And I think it can be a disincentive, it can be an issue, and I think the conservation PUD in particular has a number of administrative things that make it a nightmare. Because it's counting units over 10 years. So, I own 50 acres. I subdivide and I sell John 20 of them. John then turns around and subdivides and makes 8 more parcels, or we'll go 10 more parcels. Now he's tripped into conservation PUD. So all the conservation, everything that's happened over the last 10 years gets rolled in. So I only subdivided 1 parcel, but I'm now caught because he subdivided further. He did 10 units, which tripped us into the required conservation, which means 40% of the parcel now must be conserved. So am I now losing 40% of my property, even though I'm not the one who did the subdivision, but I'm one of those 10 parcels, but I'm part of that 10-year subdivision. It just has these funky things, and then who's got the conservation requirement and who's got the development rights, and if you don't use all the development rights, who's got the remaining development rights? There's still 30 developable units still out there. How many of them does John have? How many of them do I have? There are just all these unanswered issues with the way it was structured. It's making an assumption that you're kind of one developer doing everything. But the reality is, I just subdivided 20 acres and gave them to John because I thought he was going to go and put in a little miniature pony farm, and next thing I know, he's subdividing it and putting in condos, and I'm now wrapped up into a conservation PUD, and how much rights do I have? And that was the complaint actually that Dan Richardson had, who's a local attorney now with Burlington, but he was a local attorney on the DRB and was on the city council, and he opposed the conservation PUD because he thought it was just fraught with these administrative issues that we're going to, if and when it gets used, it's going to end up catching somebody, and it's going to be a legal mess just because it doesn't account for enough of the factors. So that was my concern specifically with conservation. But I felt the new neighborhood PUD as a requirement can also come in, as it did for Sabin's Pasture, because they wanted to kind of do this neighborhood of 12-unit buildings to kind of match, this 8, 10, 12-unit multifamily housing, and it has a requirement that you need to have no more than 75%, so they were going to have to build 25% single-family homes. So if they did, 100 multifamily, or if they did 75 multifamily, they were going to have to do 25 single-family homes, and they didn't want to do any single-family homes, but they were going to be required to do single-family homes because they were pushed into the new neighborhood PUD. And those are the types of issues that come up. Those requirements that all of a sudden you're like, yeah, but I don't want to do single-family homes. Well, you've got to. You got to make 25% of them single-family homes. And that was, and they had some issues with how the buildings were oriented. They had to be oriented certain ways to the street, but why wouldn't you orient your buildings to the south, which is what Sabin's Pasture was complaining about. We want to orient our buildings to the south. Yes, this road's going to cut and go straight up the hill, but we don't want to be facing sideways. We want to be facing the valley. We want to be facing Berry Street. But the rules are going to require us to turn all of our buildings and face them so you see the sides of the buildings. And so those were a number of the design considerations. That makes sense when you're looking at them on paper, but when you start to apply the rules in topography and in context, you kind of end up deciding maybe that's not resulting in the best outcome.
Anyone have any comments about this one? Everyone, so that means everyone's okay with removing these requirements? Yeah? Okay. Mike, you mentioned that you brought this up before and it was shot down. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, this was proposed actually last February. We had this come up. I had pushed to remove the requirements when it was passed in 2018 and obviously lost. The proposal came up again in last February because it was part of in order for Sabin's Pasture project to move forward, they had to have a number of zoning changes made because the zoning, and I think there were some changes to traffic requirements, but one of them was we had to remove the PUD requirement. So what the Planning Commission and City Council eventually did was to very narrowly just cut out, so the riverfront used to be a required district. So if you're in the riverfront and you're doing 40 units, then you have to meet these rules. And we just plucked riverfront out of the requirement, but left it in effect for all the rest of the town. And we kind of said we would revisit it as it comes up. And so being that we were talking about adding in general PUDs and adding in these other PUDs, I inserted that one back in for reconsideration again. And again, we'll have to evaluate whether it does or doesn't impact Zach's project afterwards.
So if we make this change, does that make the thing John was saying earlier moot though? Because
it would. That's be the question: is do we keep it in and evaluate it? There's no particular project sitting out there right now that this new neighborhood PUD will prohibit. We can go with John's proposal, give it 2 weeks and have Zach review that, and we can decide whether or not to remove the new neighborhood PUD requirement in 2 weeks.
I mean, if we're ready to move things forward, I don't know if there's a way to add a note to push that conversation to city council and have Zach or others this was again an attempt at a previous planning commission to try to find some kind of middle ground or compromise given what we were hearing and what the projects were proposed. Mike, I do think some of what you were saying was maybe not completely accurate. There would never be a requirement for 25% to be single family homes. They just, no more than 75% of the units can be the same type. So that could be a duplex, the idea being the planning commission at the time, and based on the feedback we wanted, was they didn't want just a bunch of monolithic buildings that were exactly the same being put up.
Yeah, that's true. It does say not of the same type, so it wasn't saying they had to be single family.
And with regard to the 40%, with all of these large parcels, the reality is 40% of them are all probably undevelopable. I mean, 40% of those parcels are probably undevelopable anyway, if you look at slopes and wetlands and other features. So that wasn't an issue for the developers, but it sounds like maybe the requirement to have a certain percent of a mixed type of building unit. And then there were, I think, other things that were also added. The solar orientation. Which I can't remember if it's part of this PUD or where it is, but I was maybe not a fan of, but was that was included. But given, I think, the challenges of just developing anywhere in Montpelier, it didn't seem like seemed tricky. So anyways, all of that to say, I don't want people to hold things up on my account, but I do see it as a potential opportunity if some of these things are going to be met anyway, and it does ensure or does help address some of the underlying concerns that have been articulated, it could be an option.
Yeah, and that was my thought too, listening to the hearing, was that PUDs, the use of a PUD for the Northfield Street area would resolve the concerns, plus allow appropriate housing to be built and meet that need as well. So, I mean, yeah, I had the same thoughts about that. Might be an ideal solution to make everyone happy. Sounds like the project that was proposed, on the other hand, is very similar to what a PUD would be. At the very least, whether we do what John was saying about possibly, checking in and finding out if PUD is possible, even if we don't end up insisting on going that route, it might be useful to learn from Zachariah that whether or what about the project would not fit with the PUD rules. I think that would be an important piece of information for us. Even if we voted out, might be interested just to know, just for our own knowledge, what about it might inform us about what's lacking about the PUD rules. I don't know. In general, though, John, how do you feel about in a vacuum the number 7 item here and making these changes? And what do you think in your mind? What are the pros and cons of removing the especially the requirement for, in any development over 40 units to have to follow this.
I guess it gets at the uncertainty around how a property will be developed, which is always going to be there. You can't legislate good design or zone to make sure you get a great project, right? And you can get rid of zoning and get an unbelievable project, and you could try to craft the most specific detailed zoning and end up with one that very few people like. And this was trying to get at the primary concerns that were articulated around where this whole property is going to just get paved over, and we're going to lose access, or these opportunities to create these network connections are going to be gone. So if we remove that, does it increase or decrease the likelihood of either of those happening? I'm not sure. But previously that seemed to work for people. Now it sounds like it doesn't. I haven't read it in detail enough to know what other, every little thing starts to add up. So I am a fan of if there's no real purpose for something, let's remove it. So yeah, I'd be okay with sending it to the city council, and perhaps, there is a footnote saying you might consider this based on some conversations with developers and understanding whether or not this is really problematic or would get in the way of us meeting our housing goals or not. The more ways we can give them ways to, because the city council will want to be responding to any concerns being articulated, and if they can find ways to address them, or if we have tools to give them, they can say, we've heard you, we believe this should address it, and great.
Okay. For now, let's move on, and then at the end, let's get to these next few items, and at the end we can decide whether we want to vote tonight or wait for more info for the relationship between number 3 and number 7 here. Okay. 8. Removal of residential density requirements for riverfront and res 1500. So this was the thing I'd asked Mike to put in. Feedback we received was just, I think people wanted to know if we had an idea of what would happen with this. I think the expectation is that nothing will really happen, and I think that's, the point of it is to say that if we can start backing away from using density so much, that it's going to be a good thing. It's going to help us have better conversations about planning and zoning. The only thing I can think of because there was talks about studying it, the only thing I could think of for studying this would be just to look at what was our experience with the downtown core when density caps were removed, and whether there was subsequent development that exceeded those caps. I think that is a fair question, and that's the closest thing to a study I can think of about what we would expect to happen with this change. Mike, do you happen to know the answer to that?
No, there hasn't been density in the urban center for a long time, so I don't know how much that changed. I do know, which I mentioned, the review, which I don't have the report yet from Congress of New Urbanism and AAR, but they did say, they think we have a good idea that is just not quite ready to go because we need to have better design review rules. That was their comment.
Yeah. So
we should be working in that direction, but we really should do admit whether it's by neighborhood or whether it's something slightly larger, doing a handful of neighborhoods to go through and say we want to adjust this area to remove the residential density, so we should get better design rules. I'm hoping we'll get more from CNU when we get the report. But
so what parts of these neighborhoods are not subject to design review? Because I've definitely assumed that they were subject to design review.
So residential 1500, not all of it is. So I think if you get over near the Pioneer Apartments, that's not design review. Kind of over where John lives. I think he's over that way. There are parts of that are residential 1500, but don't have Loomis Street. Loomis Street has half of Loomis Street is Res 3000, the other half is Res 1500. They are not in design review over there. There are, I want to say Cedar Street, a couple of these. There are quite a few of them, and then there's a lot of riverfront. Almost all of River Street is outside of design review, and that's all riverfront. A lot. I mean, I think the design review goes out to Granite Street, but beyond Granite Street, Granite Shed Lane, Caledonia Spirits, heading out that way is all outside of design review. So there's significant portions that don't have the design review rules that other places do.
Okay, and all of downtown, all the downtown core does have design review.
Yep, all of Urban Center 1 and a good chunk of, as I said, Barry Street out to the out to Granite Street is in, and I think out to the roundabout and a little bit past it, but it only includes part of it. I think it goes out to the school, but doesn't include the school. So.
Oh, so there. But so, I mean, specifically, my question is: do we currently have any place in the city that does not have a density cap and also does not have design review?
Well, it's just Urban Center 1, 2, and 3.
Mm-hmm. We're running out of time.
I would think we do everything currently in Urban 1, 2, and 3 would also all be in design review. I don't think, without looking at the map, I can't think of any of those that would be. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what do people think about this? Like knowing this, that there's interest in pursuing this. Do we want to move forward now? Do we want to wait and work with the two NGOs that have reached out about the topic? I think it's a cool endorsement of the whole idea that we have national NGOs interested in the same thing, the same tree that we were barking up here. But what do people think about it? And I won't have her feelings if you guys want to put it aside.
I have a question about like the 8.2 and 8.3 section that we would be. Wait, sorry. Yeah, Res 1500 districts, the green on the map, the neon green, right? Am I looking at the right thing? I'm wondering about, we started a conversation earlier about parking minimums. And I could, if density shot up in those areas, I could see a street parking issue if parking was not made available. I don't know that I feel strongly enough to hold up the discussion. I just still have thoughts about parking, and we never really got anywhere on that. So I don't know if I'm conflating the two things or not. But
we did have that conversation, and already Res 1500 does not have parking requirements.
Great, thank you. I knew the downtown didn't have parking requirements, but Res
Downtown
15
downtown doesn't have parking requirements, and Res 1500 does not have a parking requirement. And that
Great,
was
thank-
actually a proposal you guys made. That was actually a proposal city council put in. So it was kind of a one they threw in at the last second.
Okay then, moot point.
Any thoughts on this? Does that mean people are okay with proceeding with this as like just an incremental experiment? And I don't see it as directly conflicting with anything that the NGOs are interested in looking at. I think it starts us down that path, and then we can go in and have whatever work we do with them, kind of reconcile what they would like to see with this change. Okay, so not hearing any opposition, gonna move on. Okay. Minor technical fixes. Are there any of these that people have concerns with? Signs, changes for the dog park. Nothing? Okay. And number 10 is the reserve.
We did get some written comments on that one, just that way we make sure we reflect that.
On number 9, the technical.
Yeah, the gentleman, Thomas Weiss, had his concerns, which I think we had heard. I just wanted to make sure we remembered he made some comments about wanting to maintain creating a right of solar access, and he wanted it actually expanded, not contracted. But I just wanted to point out we did get written comments that were forwarded to you on those.
So the shading thing was in those technical fixes? Sorry, I didn't.
Yes.
Because I think didn't Kate Stevenson also mention keeping that in there for future solar installations? I have to say I don't know. I support generally, restrictions that are easy to work with, so to encourage development, but I did feel a little bit confused about thinking about that issue, whether it does seem good to plan for future solar development, but on the other hand, it's so hard to develop. I don't want to keep a shading requirement that's really hard to work with. So I'll just put out there that I was a little bit torn, I guess, on that one.
I'll mention my neighbors have a 0-foot setback on my property, but my solar panels are all shaded by the trees on the schoolyard. So unless we're going to start requiring people to cut down their 60-foot white pines along their property boundary, I don't know that this is going to do a whole lot for solar.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. So my inclination to go ahead with it feels better. Go ahead.
I thought there was something that was going to remain having to do with new solar or something.
Existing and permitted would be protected. So if there is an existing, and again, that's just from structures. So if you've got an existing solar panel on your roof, and if somebody does a project that trips this requirement, in other words, you've got to do something significant to trip into this in the first place. But when you do, if you're building a new structure, and there is that solar panel that exists, then it will, you can end up impacting the project, because you can't shade an existing or proposed or permitted solar project. So that was kind of...
Unless you use trees.
Unless you use trees. Then you can plant as many trees as you want, and exact your revenge for not being able to build your 2-story house.
That would be some yeah, hefty neighbor trolling. You're like getting importing like redwoods in the Montpelier just to. Yeah. Okay. So you're good, Ariane? Sounds like. Okay. And number 10, river hazard. Seems completely non-controversial. Anyone have anything on that? Okay, so we've got 9 minutes left. What are our thoughts about the idea we set aside? Do we want to vote now, or do we want to wait to hear more about the PUD possibilities with the Northfield project?
I say we vote.
Okay. Does anyone else?
I was going to say, I still feel, I just haven't done enough of my homework on the PUD issue. I still don't understand wait, what that is. Okay.
In a nutshell, we could change it so that the zoning is changed to allow a project, but not make it so that the PUD wouldn't apply. So this particular project or any larger project more than 40 units would have to do it as a PUD.
Yeah, I guess.
But if we don't wait, if we just vote tonight, the proposal is to also get rid of the PUD requirement. So any project going in would not have to be a PUD. And right now, what we don't know is whether the proposed project could do it that way or not. So we shouldn't. So we should wait and find information out if we're going to try to go the PUD requirement route.
Okay. Well, I'm in support of moving forward with Northfield Street as proposed. So I think I'm okay with voting tonight then in that case.
Yeah, because the PUD, if we made it apply to Northfield, are we saying we wouldn't? Number 7, then the removal of required PUD language in new neighborhoods and concert. Is that what's in conflict?
That would be on hold too, because if we're going to try to take the PUD approach to handling the number 3 issue, then we shouldn't change 7 because that requirement's part of that plan.
Right. Okay, I see. Okay, I was worried for a second. It sounded more like spot zoning if we were going to say, well, let's try to get this one, like in order to address the concerns about parks, which I think are obviously we've all agreed are relevant. By the PUD thing, I was worried it was going to be, but it a little bit more spot zoning, but maybe that's not the case. My brain is like getting around it, but barely.
I think Mike is right that we're not any close to spot zoning with any of this because we're taking the whole area into account. We're taking city needs into account. Okay. This is not about helping one landowner. Okay. Frankly, I don't even know who the landowner is or anything about that. It's just I think we're far from it. Okay. So Marcella, which side of it are you on, voting now or not?
I'm fine to vote now.
Okay. I haven't heard from Jeff or Aaron or John about that. You guys have any feelings about that?
Yeah, we can do it now.
I'm like I said, I'm fine to vote now. The reality is, we received 0 comments on the PUDs. So, like I said, it could be worth mentioning to the city council that there is potential for an opportunity there if it meets everyone's needs. But if no one is asking for it, then there's no sense in.
I think we're going to update the memo and beef it up a lot. I think that's pretty obvious. Mike knows that's what we want. I'd be fine with noting that. Would everyone else be fine with noting that there's this PUD avenue that's possible? And put that out there to the public and city council. I mean, along with like all the other stuff. I mean, it would just be.
So
Yeah, I guess I'm just concerned that what if we put that out there? So again, I apologize for my lack of understanding, but if we put that out there and then the city council hears all these comments and says, oh, we should put a required PUD in the Northfield Street parcel, but maybe I'm not understanding something correctly. I'm concerned about creating barriers for a development.
Yeah,
Might
I'm
not
concerned
work.
about. I'm concerned about if we're not understanding it as well. Maybe it would be difficult to just. Maybe we should do the research. If that's an actual question, maybe we ought to do, or Mike would help. But you know.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can cross that bridge later. We can find out more info, and we can maybe ask Mike to share the updated version of things, and we can sign off on it because we should sign off on the memo that's being passed along to city council. Does that sound okay, Mike?
So we're drafting things to make the change at number 3 to be Res 9000. We're going to continue with the recommendation to remove the requirements for new neighborhood and conservation, but we're going to provide more information to the city council that reflects the fact that we considered keeping new neighborhoods in, at least for residential 9,000, as a requirement, and if we did, then a larger project would have to meet these requirements. And then in the interim, we can develop have a certain amount of conversation with Zachariah about how much of an impact that would have. But what gets recommended to council is to remove that requirement. But the city council is aware that they could certainly put that back in if they feel that it won't impact that project and it won't.
Mm-hmm. If they're concerned about what we're recommending is going too far, is not cautious enough, or for whatever their reasons are, to let them know of an alternative we considered. But yeah, by voting this out, we're saying that we are comfortable making the change as proposed, and we believe that it lines up with the city plan's goals and is a needed thing.
Yeah. And usually, I mean, you guys as planning commissioner are usually reflecting things with your planning commissioner hats on, and certainly we should all be aware and cognizant as things move up to city council that politics and other things become, more of an issue and more relevant to their position. I mean, they're obviously going to be concerned about the city plan and the zoning and all the details that go into it, but they're usually a little bit more removed and may have to, as happened in the zoning proposal. We made, in 2017, we made a proposal to them, and they went through and, based on public input, made a number of changes that Planning Commission didn't support, but recognizing that they were trying to make sure that this was going to pass muster with the politics with a small p. To make sure the Town Hill got their zoning at 24,000, even though everybody on the Planning Commission thought that was ridiculous. But that's what ultimately was needed to get that passed, and to make that sausage and making that legislation.
So that reminds me, and I do want to make the point, just for the record here before we vote, that one elephant in the room that we haven't talked about in this deliberation is that I think is on all of our minds, just to put in the record, is the city plan calls for a lot more housing development and for the city to take seriously the need for housing. We're all very concerned with housing, and we're supposed to review, according to the city plan, the bylaws to address housing needs. And that's all a big part of this. And I do want to just get that in the record, that's a big part of why we're wanting the changes that we want here. Almost all of these changes touch on that need for housing, and it's a citywide need. So it sounds like we're ready to vote and prepared to vote. So why don't we do that? We'll cover the contents of the information we want to put out there about this as Mike gets it to us later. So those in favor of, well, actually, I guess I need a motion, a motion along the lines of, it sounds like, along the lines of whether we want to pass all of the proposals as they are currently proposed, because we've not decided on changing any of that right now. So
I think
Motion that
the only change was the rail set, like if you're talking about the document that's posted online, the only change was that rail setback, right?
Correct.
yeah, let's be clear about that. What changed specifically with the rail setback for number for the number
It was
5?
like can be 0 if an agreement is made between the rail and the property owner, right?
Yes.
And that's not reflected in the document online, but is reflected in
Okay. So thanks for that clarification. So do we have Marcelo? You want to make
I motion that we vote to approve the whole slate together to include that recommended amendment for the rail lines.
Okay, that sounds good. Do we have a second to Gabe's motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, a second from Marianne. Those in favor, or do we have any further deliberation on the motion before we move on? Any discussion of the motion? Okay. Those in favor of the motion proposed by Gabe and seconded by Ariane, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstain? Okay, so that's 7-0-0. Motion in favor from the Planning Commission on that. And yeah, Mike, when you can, try to give us an updated memo on everything we talked about, and let's get that posted in all the places we discussed.
Well, I'll draft it. Do you want me to
Yeah.
change
Before
the
posting
wording so that way it's a memo from you guys to City Council, or do you want me to draft it with me to City Council, or the two of us, and have you guys just approve it at the next meeting, or what's your?
I guess since we're going to want to approve it, you could do it from us, and then prepared by you once you get your credit. But yeah, let's do it that way, because you, and that also lets you do your own thing if you want to communicate to the City Council something aside from what we want to. Is that okay?
Yeah. Nope. I'll draft it up, and you guys can shuffle it and chop it apart and do whatever you feel is kind of reflects your. I think it's good for City Council to also hear it with your voice as well, so that way, yes, I prepared the original draft that went to you, but at a certain point, it becomes your proposal to them. So to make sure that I'll put stuff together and you guys can wordsmith and kind of capture and make sure we've got everything reflecting your voice, that this is the Planning Commission recommendation to City Council.
Yeah, that's great. And also, yeah, we want to get it out there publicly too. That's a big part of this, is we want to make sure that the public gets to see this, and so that we can, so that it's well understood, or people have an opportunity to understand it well before City Council gets it. Okay. We're gonna put off the minutes approval because we're past time. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Okay, motion from Ariane. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Marcella. Those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. See everyone in 2 weeks.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mike.